welcome to another episode of Aquarian Light. Today's episode is titled Neo, Smith, and the Matrix. We're going to be bringing this analogy to life as it pertains to the spiritual work. I'm Ruth.
I'm Adonis.
And we just actually watched The Matrix Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, just as a refresh. And the esoteric symbology in that trilogy, we're just ignoring Part 4. It's so blatant. And it would be really good for us to unpack a lot of the symbols and bring to life, all of the examples and analogies in the series.
Yeah, for sure. It's great. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, esoteric value in a lot of some of the more famous pop culture things, including things like Star Wars and like Marvel and things like that. But The Matrix specifically is just so overt with like, especially the Gnostic symbology. There's obviously intent put there, even little things like some of the names of the ship, like in Matrix Reloaded, you have like a ship named the Gnosis and the logos. I think there's just so many effigies of like the Gnostic cross in both the first movie, the third movie, like just like panels on the buildings or like the restaurant of the Merovingian. Also, just every time it seems like explodes, it seems like it explodes at either a regular crucifix or a Gnostic crucifix. So that's it's definitely very overt symbology as far as just whereas more of our more modern, I would call them modern mythology, something like a Star Wars or Matrix, but more of those like kind of like those hero's journey type of things that we have in our media tend to be more of that, just that archetype, but not so like overt with, like the language that's used and things like that, sort of like the logos and things like that. So
Or
yeah.
even the Trinity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Neo meaning the one, the Trinity. So if we were going to go back to the beginning, let's say we go back to Part 1, who is Neo? What does he represent?
Well, Neo for me, I mean, first of all, Neo being like the anagram for the one, right? Like kind of represents in an exoteric way. So in an exoteric way, it's that messianic figure that's at the center of every religion, right? Like so like a Jesus figure, right? Or like a Krishna, something like that. But esoterically, and since the motifs of these movies is very much about the path and walking the path, doesn't really like hide that if you're paying attention. um Neo more represents that inner, the inner, I guess, Christ that's within all of us, so like the being, so that inner master that has to awaken from being asleep, and in this computer program representing being like, down in the physical body and in the physical dimension, and him having to like awaken out of that, and then eventually, ascending back up to your true nature and realizing your true nature as is relative to the entire construct itself.
And then how about Trinity and Morpheus? What about those characters?
Well, with the name Trinity, right? Obviously, you see the references to the Kabbalistic Trinity or the Holy Trinity that's in every religion. Um, Really, Morpheus probably represented that, like the father, or like Kether, and Kabbalistically, or Ra, or whatever, the dad god, right? Like that. So the top of the tree, and then Neo is the messianic figure being the son, and then Trinity would be representing that Holy Spirit. That's where the Divine Mother is. So it makes sense that that'd be the female character as well. The Divine Mother being the feminine aspect of the Holy Spirit, which is usually has a male and a female aspect, as it is like the creative force itself. So we think of divine masculine, divine feminine in a new age term. That would be like the Holy Spirit, or Shiva the destroyer, and Shakti in Hindi and things like that. So yeah, that's not very veiled right there, giving her the name Trinity, being that third. So if you have like the Father, the Son, and the neutral force, right? So positive, negative, and neutral force that binds them together, right? So that's definitely a reference to that. They do a lot of play with the Kabbalistic number of 3 as well. in like Matrix Reloaded, when they go into, help him return back to source, which another another good term, they go in 3 teams of 3, you know what I mean?
They
So,
didn't even
which is,
hide it though when they called it source. They didn't
yeah, no, right, it's source.
even figure.
But even the 3 teams of 3, you want to go really deep Kabbalistically, right? So if we look at the Kabbalah tree, I wish we had like little diagrams of those screen share, but you actually have 3 triangles on the Kabbalah tree. So you have like the top Trinity, right? Like you have the 3-in-1, which is consciousness itself. And then below that, you have the 3-in-1 that has the spirit and the soul and the consciousness. And then you have the lower triangle, which represents our lower bodies of sin or whatever. So you have the physical body, with physical vital body together, actually. And then like the astral and the mental plane, right? But there's actually 3 triangles on the tree of life that would, as it unfolds down. So the 3 teams of 3 is a direct motif, basically, to return to source, because they're returning to source. They need 3 teams of 3 to get all the way back up the tree of life. So that's really cool. But
Yeah,
yeah,
because sorry, you go.
no, you're okay. Go ahead.
I was gonna say part one, well, each movie has its theme, right? So part one, the main theme is the beginning of the awakening process, and for Neo to discover who he really is, his true nature, his true being, because he starts off asleep, and we even have that symbology where he's sleeping at his computer. So you have the machine, you have the mechanicity, you have that spiritual inquietude, that searching for there's something more, something's not quite right. And then he has to go through this process of unlearning everything that he thought was real and learning to come into that place of believing in the higher dimensions, the higher planes, waking up in the higher planes, and then realizing how the matrix is indeed silly putty, and coming into that knowing that can see it as illusion, because it's one thing to know that intellectually, and they can tell him it, they can show him, but even then he has to have faith and belief and really experientially break free from the matrix. And then when he's interacting with it, as he begins to believe and see the construct more and more for what it is, then he comes to a place where when he interacts with it, he is transcendent of it, and then it doesn't have a grasp on him, and that's where he starts to be able to dodge bullets and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked about this in the past, about how awakening consciousness is actually a series of reality breaking events. It's not just that everybody thinks it's that first moment. It's like, oh, when he takes the red pill and becomes aware of like the machine world, which would be I guess, becoming aware of the astral plane or something like that, right? Like we're able to like astral project, or we wake up in a dream and we're like, oh, there's so much more to this world, right? And at that point, you're really actually still very much like asleep, right? We do talk about how, you're still like trapped. You can still be trapped in duality and be flying around the astral plane and having these experiences and awakeness of consciousness, but still stuck in the mechanicity and the duality of ego. But it's interesting how that is like shown as the movie goes on. Like, so at the beginning, I mean, they give him the downloads, so they start like downloading things into like right, like literally downloading information into his brain and stuff. But he still has to like get over like these fears and things that attach us to duality. So it's like, even though, okay, now I'm aware of, that this is some type of simulation or whatever it is, there's still that belief in it being real and not being detached from that belief. So they have like the jump test, right? And he fails the jump test when he first starts doing it, because it's like, even though he knows he should be able to clear and jump over to the other building, because he's been shown that this is just a computer simulation, he still believes that it's dangerous. There's still fear there. This is a good analogy that this is still all an illusion. In a sense, another good example of this is when Neo visits the Oracle for the first time, he encounters these children they have psychic abilities and all of this. And one of them shows him how to bend a spoon. And the child says to him, do not try to bend the spoon because it's impossible. But really, you have to realize that the spoon isn't there. And what you're really bending is only yourself. And that speaks to the true nature of reality, the fact that everything is consciousness and we are consciousness. So really, we control our external reality. And we have to realize then that while we're still trapped in these fears and everything, then even if we may be aware of reality, we only understand it intellectually. And as we try to intellectualize this will keep us from being able to truly achieve the awakening of the consciousness and the potential that we have within us.
So when people are coming into the esoteric work, they begin to apply tools and they begin to awaken consciousness. But there's a clear distinction between awakening consciousness and the dissolution of the ego. If we just awaken consciousness, then it can be very dangerous because the powers that come with it are then put in the hands of the ego. How do we see that analogy in the Matrix?
Well, before getting to that, also I think that there's a good quote that I personally love and like to drop a lot, but it's a Morpheus quote in the first movie. But he says there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And this comes around to another motif in the movie too, where Neo earlier had gone to the Oracle, and the Oracle tells him basically, like you're not the one when he asks, "Am I?" Right? Because he doesn't actually comprehend that yet, right? And that's going to show it. If he's trying to intellectually understand it, he won't be the one. And then finally, when things go down, and then he has to actually, have that awakening moment, that unplugging moment in the heat of the moment. And he asks Morpheus, how's this possible? And how's he able to do all these things? The Oracle lied to him. And he's like, no, the Oracle told you what you needed to know, because you can't just know that you're the one. You have to actually comprehend that you're the one. And he gives him the line that there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And that is very true. And it really just it's an analogy for that exactly there, right? There's so many people, especially now today, in today's day and age, there's been at least an awareness shed light onto like esoteric topics and stuff in this like mass energetical flow that came out around like in 2010, 2012 or whatever, but people started having spontaneous awakenings. It's just in the collective consciousness, it's become a little bit more, there is like this subtle like group awareness that's like raised towards this esoteric wisdoms. But for the most part, people are going to these types of schools that we would consider a kindergarten school, for example, these new age schools that like will just tell you, yeah, we have to awaken our consciousness, and all you have to do is just be good, and your consciousness is going to awaken. Or even worse, they'll end up in a school that's teaching methods of the left-handed path, which encourage you to awaken the consciousness through the ego, and to strengthen your bond to the physical material world. And then you become, the opposite of what you think. I mean, I'm sure everybody thinks of, like dark egoical schools as like satanic schools and like, these cults, and those do exist. But realistically, I mean, maybe some famous people like sold their soul to get to where they are and stuff, or some really like some of the people that the elite. But most people that end up going down that dark path really are just think that they're normal people and are trying to be good, and then they get way too attached to the system to the point where this psychosis develops, and they start defending the system, that's defending the construct. And there's some great symbology for that in the character of Agent Smith, right? I mean, first of all, Smith is just the motif for the ego itself, right? Just everything about how he thinks. It's like in at the end of the third movie when they have their big face off, and he's like, the purpose of life is to die. And that's just like such a great, like just like the concept, like how the ego thinks, and he goes on his little rant, and he's talking about how humans are so pathetic, and he's basically like going through like all they care about is like these material things and all the stuff, and that's really just all the things that the ego thinks about, and it's how it sees reality, you know what I mean? As this like finite dualistic thing. So in that sense, he's the ego itself, but he's also the motif of basically, you know, what one becomes when they awaken the consciousness through the ego. So and then they literally say that in the first movie, right? There's like certain people like are so comfortable that if you try to unplug them, like they can't, they'll actually just like flip the opposite way and they'll start to defend the construct. And then on top of that, right, it's they still develop powers, right? Like Agent Smith is almost as powerful as Neo in the opposite way, except in I believe it's this is his first movie when he's training Neo though, and he's talking about how the agents have these powers, but he's like, but how their powers though are still limited though, even though they're great, they're limited to the construct itself. So they could expand as far as the construct will allow it to, but they're still limited to the equations and the rules of that plane, right? So all of that in a sense is like the motif of like a black magician or whatever. And then there's also the third symbology that's dropped down on him in the third movie, which is in relation to basically this antichrist type figure, right? So if Neo is the Christ, he's his negative double, right? And that's that sense of the duality that's there. So we have the fact that, I mean, if people have heard of like law of one or things like of that nature in New Age, but there's just this concept in many esoteric schools that, you know, for the contract, duality has to express itself. So for anyone that is taking in all of this positive energy towards trying to achieve the balance in one direction, there has to be another person that will then take the negative energy downward and become, I guess, like, you know, a Sith or whatever, Agent Smith, you know, black magician or whatever, but it's needed to balance the energy that's needed for the creation of someone to go in the opposite direction. And it's, I mean, that's basically what the Oracle tells Neo Smith is in the third movie, but it's the system trying to balance itself out because Neo is like pulling all this light. So there's somebody has to pull all this darkness, and it creates that evil double. And it's the concept of while you're in there, there's these dualistic poles that has to happen. And the real cool thing about it as well is when we're talking about how we need to transcend duality to truly escape from the matrix, right? Or to truly escape from the construct that, you know, Neo fights Smith for 3 movies. They're fighting, and they're constantly going at each other. But at the end of it, with the help of his divine mother, the Oracle of the divine mother, right? She, after being assimilated by Smith, says to him through Smith, you know, everything has a beginning and an end. And what does Neo finally stop doing? He stops fighting and allows Smith to assimilate him and finds that balance between his positive and negative aspect. And only then does he actually destroy the matrix from within by releasing all the light. So it's like the perfect example of that, right? And that is what the path is, right? Because as long as we're still being dualistic, we're still trapped. This is shown by how when Neo at the end of the second movie, Matrix Reloaded, right? He's in the 5th dimension and he's still able to use his powers in I mean the machine world, which is analogous to the astral world. The astral plane is still within the construct, right? So him being able to use his powers in the astral world is the whole point, is that he still hasn't escaped the matrix. He's gotten out of one level, he's gotten out of Plato's cave and he's gotten into a bigger Plato's cave, and he's still there. And he goes back to the Oracle in Matrix Revolutions and he's like, how's this possible? And she's just like, you know, because what the one is connected to goes beyond this world, and he's actually connected back to the source. And then he finally like goes back to source, an actual source in the third movie, because when he goes to source in the second movie, actually he comes across basically the architect, who is like the satanic Luciferic character that's supposed to be like, you know, the king of the material, whatever, the guy, you know, creating the construct. It's kind of like the Lucifer, the Saturn, right? Cronus, whatever,
But I
that
find that really
aspect of divinity.
interesting that
Huh?
it's called an architect, because you also sort of feel that a causal being, not necessarily negative, but just, you know, a causal being that creates below it is also essentially an architect.
Well,
which is
yes,
why.
the architects of the construct in objective reality do exist at the causal plane. You have like the those beings that are balanced, but I feel like that is more representative of like the Merovingian and the Train Man actually, and they actually talk about causality in the movie. The character that's named the architect is more, like I said, more of that, like the classic demiurge of Gnosis. That is not really what the demiurge is, but that the public views the exoteric idea of what the demiurge is, which is like the god Saturn or Cronus in Greek mythology, the Titan, right? Or what I mean, like Lucifer himself, right? This the negative aspect of Lucifer. So not the light bringer, but the one that is the god of the material, the one that we have to like purify, but the false god, right? That runs
So
everything, that created all our religions and our politics and all of that. Allegedly, it's like the god, that the Old Testament God, right? That's not
mhm.
really source, but it's a being that has been like enslaving humankind. That's the vibe I get of the architect character, at least for me.
So for someone who's new to esotericism, how do we explain the misconception around the demiurge, because they might not be able to follow that, and also Lucifer's two poles as well, because
Mhm.
someone who's not familiar with esotericism will say, oh my gosh, Lucifer, that's Satanism. So both those two aspects need to be clarified.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think he's representing the negative aspect of Lucifer, which is what we would consider Satan. But Satan in general, the word Satan actually comes from like Saturn, and Saturn being the Roman name for the Greek Titan Cronus, who is the Titan that was the god of time, to time in the material. It's also related to Jehovah, who is the Old Testament God. This in esotericism is sometimes understood as, that being is not actually God, because God, as we would understand it, right, is this multiple perfect unity that is within all of us that we're all fractals of. And it's not like a being that was, like messing with us. Although in the sense of the alien theorists say, this being was like ruler of these aliens that enslaved us, which is one way of understanding it. But also esoterically, when we're thinking of Saturn or whatever, Satan, whatever, Lucifer's negative aspect. And that's why I think the Lucifer one's actually the best way to look at it in a sense, because it's like the negative positive pole. When Lucifer is Prometheus and then also like Saturn, right? In that sense. But Lucifer is like the light bringer and also like the devil, but all it's just an aspect of creation. And in the sense of the aspect of creation for the archangel that is Lucifer, it is the aspect of creation that is the material. So the material is both negative and like our perception and our attachment to it. The negative aspect of it is it's what entraps us here. It's the devil. It's our inner perception. But the positive aspect is the light bringer. We needed to descend down into the physical for us to have these experiences, and then we need the darkness to be purified to ascend back up and awaken the light of consciousness. So it's actually a necessary aspect. Everything in creation has this duality. Like I said, our I always say this over and over again, but our issue is our relationship to the duality, not the duality itself. Duality is a very necessary part of everything that is going on. It is our teacher. It is how we have experiences. It's how we experience ourselves, us all being consciousness. So in that sense, you know what I mean? Like it's not a good or a bad thing, but it just has its duality, like just like anything else, right? Like so all virtues and sins, you have humility and pride, right? You have, what I mean, like compassion and anger, what I mean? All of these things are dualistic, but they're all like necessary in a sense. It's just when you become attached to it as the not understanding that one is actually that's the illusion itself, and we become identified with these things instead of just understanding that they are and they're
Wait,
there.
what is the illusion?
The illusion that duality is our reality, right? Duality is there. Duality is necessary of creation, but illusion is not seeing that beyond that two-dimensional black and white mentality. That's what we talked about, I believe, in the last episode. But it's multidimensional, right? Because it's not oneness either, too. Like we could say, oh, we're all a unity and just go back to one and it's all fake. But it's more than that, it's multidimensional. It's a multiple perfect unity. In a sense, like we're all connected to this collective consciousness, but we're also all individuals having our own unique experience. So when
For
you
now.
yeah, but when you ascend back up with that unique experience that you're being decided to have for you, right? You're both all knowing, omnipresent, and able to access all the knowledge in the universe and all the memories in the universe, but also have your own like kind of like individual, egoic, authentic personality or whatever that you developed from all the millions of years you've been sending your human soul down and acquiring
So
knowledge.
coming back to the demiurge and Lucifer, just to clarify, because we've kind of gone round and round, but if we summarized it, okay, so Lucifer is a symbol of light that can be polarized up and down. I don't have enough room on the screen, but one up, one down. There's two different pathways for it. And then the demiurge is a lower being creator that is
No.
not
The demiurge is basically source itself. Like the actual esoteric wisdom on the demiurge is that the demiurge is the
the fake
multiple.
one and the
It
real one.
the demiurge is the multiple perfect unity. What the demiurge is thought of in the mainstream media, basically they just got it confused because the myth is there. They basically attribute the name of the demiurge to the myth of Saturn, Lucifer, Cronus, whatever, Jehovah, whatever. That the idea that there is a false god that is at the head of like these organized exoteric religions, and that we're worshiping basically the devil. That's true, but that's not what the demiurge is. The demiurge is actually the actual like multiple perfect unity, this abstract thing that everything is supposed to come from. Somehow, in translation from the esoteric to the exoteric understanding of what the esoteric wisdom is, they flipped the demiurge from being the actual source to this figure who is the material king and the false god that everyone worships. But the concept's actually there in esotericism. It's just that somehow they just got switched. So
So then how
yeah.
is Jehovah mixed into that?
So Jehovah would be the Hebrew Hebraic version of that Saturn, Cronus, whatever character. So like that would be the false god that's like, you know what I mean? Like I think the actual God, if you were like looking at the Zohar or whatever, or the one that's representative of the demiurge, and don't 100% quote me on this because this one's not. I mean, they're all everything is relative and all connected, but this one I'm not as well versed on Zohar, but I believe that's uh Yahweh. So Yahweh
We
would be the
can double check
demiurge.
that later.
I
Yeah.
believe Yahweh would be the demiurge, and then Jehovah would be like Saturn or Cronus. I'm pretty sure that's right. But
Okay.
I will
I
disclaimer
guess
that one might be, but one of them is the same thing. The concept is there of like there's the actual source, and then there's like this God being that may have been an actual alien being, like I said, relatively, like how some people say, you know what I mean? It might have been some type of like if we go back to the time, because I guess Garden Eden would have happened around the times of the Lemurian root
well,
race, but like the
how
beginning of the
about this?
Lemurian root race would have been
The alien stories, I think we have to do another separate episode and just talk about all those the alien lore and how that relates to
yeah, the
subjectivity.
pseudoscience lore actually lines up exactly with the esoteric lore and the religious lore. It's all the same thing. The truth is that if we just look at the universal threads, they're in everything. They're in literally everything. Religions, mythologies, science, pseudoscience, pop culture. There's been people that have had this knowledge and then, they retransmit it through some other medium all the time. But we were getting a little bit off topic. So um,
Yeah,
I
so
know
we
we were
come back to
talking.
the Matrix. We come back to
Yeah,
the Matrix,
yes.
but that was important just because those myths and references, if someone is not well studied, that it needs to be explained. I've had friends that were new to esotericism and they said, I'm studying it now. And then they had watched all these videos about the demiurge. So thinking of them watching this video, it wouldn't make sense unless we added that additional context. But if we come back to the Matrix, so we were on this
The architect,
really,
I believe.
yeah, we were on the architect. That's right.
Yeah. So, oh yeah, that's what I was saying. So we're saying he goes back to source in the third movie, which is actual source, whereas the architect is like represents like this character that is more the material god, and even that is an interesting moment. So when he goes back to source in the second movie, not actual source, but he goes to the architect, and he's like, you know, you've been here like 5 times already, which the symbology in that is great. Esoterically speaking, we're the fifth root race. So the fact that they've destroyed you 5 times already is a not so subtle veil, as that we've gone through these cycles of civilizations as a race, that go back, you know, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, whatever. And that them saying there's been previous versions of the Matrix is a direct connection to that, and the numbers line up also. I think actually they say it's the sixth one, which is a sense that the next root race of humanity would be the sixth race. Maybe it's a subtle veil that this one is also going to not to end well, but it is. But the numbers do like that. That is what they're hinting at with. So like that is a not so subtle thing esoterically there as well.
Could it also be a reference to going through the construct as well? Like, because each time Neo became slightly different as he awakened in the construct, and then it was reset and he went through it again and he awakened again, and every time he was slightly different. So would that also, besides the root races, be a reference to how an essence can go through the construct and have these experiences, and each time it can have an awakening journey and then fall again to repeat that, because every layer will give it a new level of wisdom?
Well, yes, that's another thing that is also esoterically known, is that a lot of masters have different degrees of mastery, and a lot of times to gain more experience or to move up and expand the consciousness even more, they will send their human soul back down into a vehicle again, and it will come with it will be re-entombed in a vehicle that will, yes, already still have 97% ego, but there'll be a sense of the essence still carries, like the essence that's free still carries the imprint of having been through the construct however many times. And that's why you could have like certain masters that say like a Jesus Christ that had such a much more impact than other people who have maybe reached enlightenment, and it is because they've reached enlightenment possibly multiple times, and every time they come back through, they're carrying some type of knowledge, and then the knowledge that's added on top of that. So it's in a sense like, if we're speaking about like their free essence at the beginning because they've been through the construct already, it's sort of like when they're connected to that, it's already has a higher understanding than somebody maybe who is working through for the first time. And then as they free up that essence and get back closer and closer, they're working from a higher place of understanding and then also expanding from there. So that's kind of, that symbolism is kind of shown in the fact that he said every time that Neo's come back through, as you mentioned, the architect has noticed that he is like a little bit faster, and he like figures he comprehends things a little bit better, and he's a little bit more mature spiritually. Well, he says mature like as a person, but the symbology is a little bit more mature spiritually, and that I would say yes is also a subtle veiled hint at that as well.
One of the themes that I thought was very important in all of the symbology, and we touched on it already, was so in the first movie, Neo has his initial showdowns with Agent Smith, and then he has his awakening moments where he's starting to break free from the construct, and he has that iconic scene where he dodges the bullets and he can move just like them. And so Agent Smith realizes that Neo is different, and these two start to go head to head. And then there's that final moment where Neo jumps inside Agent Smith and destroys him from the inside, and he thinks, yes, he's destroyed. And then every subsequent movie, Agent Smith comes back stronger. So we talked about this, but I want to unpack this a little bit more, how when someone is doing the spiritual work and they begin to work on the ego, observing it, most people will fall into the trap of thinking that it's something that I need to fight against, go head to head. And that's what Neo does. And then in every movie, all we see is that the stronger Neo gets, the stronger Agent Smith gets, to the point where he becomes just this out of control nightmare. And we see the multiplicity with Smith multiplying. The more Neo fights him, the more Agent Smiths appear, and they're stronger and they're more in number. Especially, I think it's in part 2 where Neo is Neo 2.0. He's so strong, he's so badass. And then Agent Smith, there's just endless Agent Smith. So that analogy of how when we have this battle of opposites, this battle of wills, and we think that we overcome the ego through control, I'm going to control my gluttony, control my anger. And that's where you get those people that eventually become these crazy murderers or whatever. They snap because this anger, the ego of anger, has been building and building through suppression. So suppressing the ego is a huge trick and a trap, because we don't win against it. We actually strengthen it. And that's why they say to be careful with things like fasting, because if you're not in balance, you end up actually strengthening the egos of gluttony that come back even stronger after this supposed period of fasting.
Yeah, there is something to be said about that. I think also, like, it just goes to show the idea of, like we were talking about earlier, when we don't disidentify from duality, we actually just strengthen the ego. So we awaken our powers and we become more powerful. The ego becomes more powerful as well. And the one silver lining is there. Usually, I think in a more of a real life situation, when somebody comes that dark and that consumed by ego, they usually don't get out of it. We usually, I mean, of course, there's also that motif is also in Star Wars as well, which I think we'll talk about that soon too. But like, while they may have these in the movies, and there is precedent for this as such beings, say, becoming like demons and eventually coming out of it, it's usually not something that happens in one lifetime, like the movie makes it seem. So, it obviously makes it a lot harder to overcome the ego when you fed the ego and now has all these psychic powers and it's able to use these psychic powers. But it is a motif of that. It's like the more he fights it and the more he looks at it through and he gets more powerful, his ego just gets more powerful. And and the silver lining is, at the end of the day, when he finally realizes, if I just surrender and I realize that, there it is, and I just identify from it, and I'm not going to fight anymore, and just then he's able to actually dissolve the ego with his light, as I said earlier. So it's a good motif for that, and the symbology is there, because that is how it is. We awaken the consciousness without dissolving the ego will be able to use the abilities and grow stronger as well.
And how do people, practically speaking, how do people end up doing that? What does it usually look like?
Well, a lot like what happens in the movie, right? Because, like I said, outside of the maybe very, very, very small percentage of the population that sells their soul to the devil for fame and fortune, most people are thinking they're doing good and trying to be righteous. But like I said, the concept of good and evil and black and white itself is flawed. It's really, if there is a dualistic approach to the path being a right-handed and left-handed path, and it's not actual duality, but if there really is like two poles because there are two paths, well, there's multiple paths, but really there's two paths, because all the other paths lead to this side, because they all involve being an ego. Whether you do good things or bad things, you're still attached to ego, and then eventually it leads to you suffering and you making others suffer, even if it starts out as a good and righteous thing. But there's just, ego and consciousness. But the thing is, to awaken the consciousness, we have to be balanced, right? And we have to not associate, not identify with that. You have to find the inner balance. That's why you can't actually escape from the matrix itself through that symbology until you find the balance and then get rid of the ego. Otherwise, you just are still in a higher level of the construct where there's even more, things you have to fight and face and all of these things, that are even worse and more horrible than what you have here. But you're still doing reality like that. You're still like fighting things in that astral plane or the mental plane. So the thing is, there's so many schools nowadays, as we touched on earlier, but you know, they tell you it sounds exactly the same. We're gonna work on the chakras, we're gonna, awaken the kundalini, we're gonna awaken consciousness, but we're also gonna integrate the ego because it's not so bad, and we should also be happy about our individualism and stuff. So and it really is dangerous. It's because in the sense, right, it's easier, more seductive. You might even grow your powers quicker because if you're trying to just integrate the ego, that another good reference to that would also be Star Wars. But they say that the dark side is more seductive. It's more easy to gain power. It's not stronger, right? Is it stronger when he asks Obi-Wan and Obi-Wan goes, no, it's not stronger, but it's way easier to get into. And you see results faster. So you think you're becoming more powerful because quicker, because you don't have to do all that hard work to cleanse all of that out of you before gaining. But the result is you can't rise as high because you're still always going to be trapped within the construct. And there's more power to be had by actually unplugging. But you have to not want that power too. That's a catch-22, right? If you want the power, then you're going to be attached to trying to gain power. But there's more expansion, more abilities, more all of this beyond the construct in the fifth dimension. But the only way to get beyond it is to realize that it's not real. So you get capped out, even if you can awaken your powers, like Morpheus said, Smith can awaken his powers like to these unhindered to unknown or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, his powers are still limited to what is inside the construct. He can only move as fast as physics allow it to, right? You can only be strong as physics allow it to. It corresponds to the physics of this 3D world. Even when he goes out into the machine world, he goes into the guy, and he can go into the fifth dimension by possessing the guy. But that fifth dimension, right, that machine world is also still within the matrix. It's like you can't actually transcend the programming and the machines and all that.
But that's really important because people that begin to practice spirituality and let's say they awaken the ability to astral project, then they see, oh, look, my level of consciousness has increased. And now look at my abilities. I can perceive so much more than I could perceive before. And all that is true. But then when they are, let's say they're in the astral and their consciousness is awakened to a certain level, they're still seeing things dualistically in terms of light and dark and separation. So that would be like Agent Smith he's gone out of the matrix into the machine world. And so we think, yes, I'm awakening, but we're still attached to the ego and dualism.
Mm-hmm.
And
also all the people in Zion, most of the people in Zion, right, they also don't really understand, even that is shown, and it's not even just the ones that are like, oh, like I don't believe in that stuff and we need to have a defense, but even in Morpheus himself, that he does believe it's got the oracle, and how could the prophecy not work out the way it was said, and it has to, and eventually it's like Neo is like, it's not about what the oracle told me or whatever it is. It's like, I gotta go to this, I gotta go back to source because I know it in me, it's within me. Nobody told me to do this. No. I have to go because it's the only thing that's gonna work. Because I just know it's like I have this comprehension that this is the only way. This for me to return back to the machine city. Even and everybody else is still, either stuck in their beliefs or they just are, doubters. You know what I mean? But that's because they're still seeing it dualistically. It's got to be one way or the other. Everybody that's in Zion, and those are the people that are awakened.
Yeah, that's an important part of it, because people that study spirituality, maybe they are with an organization and there could be a doctrine, and there's a set of tools, and it can give someone a feeling of safety, but then also attachment to that particular group or that particular way of thinking and that set of rules, not realizing that this is the scaffolding for a building to be constructed, say in this analogy, and then the scaffolding has to come down. You don't leave the scaffolding up on the outside of the building. Or another analogy would be taking a boat across the river. You don't then try and carry the boat after you've crossed the river. They're a set of principles and tools and guides that can get you to a certain point so you can be free yourself. And when you are free, the rules don't apply in the same way. And all of those tools and that safety net, you've also gone past that as well. So people that are still stuck inside of rules and organization and commandments, and this is a rule of thumb, this is how it goes, they are still trying to cross the river. We don't know where they are on the river, or if they're sitting in the boat and it hasn't started to cross the river, but they're in the boat, and they might see someone who has crossed the river in this analogy. We're not necessarily saying how far that means you're on the path, but you've crossed the river in terms of there's some rules that don't apply to you, or you're not confined by the limitations of dualistic thinking and rules and regulation. You're not confined by these restrictions because source and divinity is so free that it's not limited to those things. So when you're in that freedom of oneness with your being, who you truly are, what you are supposed to be doing in this incarnation, there's going to be people that don't understand you, whether they are people that are asleep in the matrix or whether they're asleep inside of spirituality. They may not be able to comprehend and fathom what it is you're doing and how can you do that and why, and these are my rules, these are the things, my rules of thumb, how I think it is supposed to be. And all of that is still like the people in Zion that didn't know why Neo had to go to Machine City, or Morpheus getting confused with the prophecy, because this is another important point, is that in spirituality, there's all kinds of messages, and the messages will be different at different times for different stages. And depending on where you are, the message for you will be different. So for example, someone who comes into a kindergarten school, maybe at that stage of their journey, they just need to come into balance and peace. And that's all that needs to happen in this incarnation. So they're right where they need to be. Now, a lot of the things that they may hold dearly, actually, if they kept going through the layers, then the reality shifting moments or those bursts through the construct in those different layers and levels, everything below would be shattered because now you're seeing it from a new vantage point. It's like going up a mountain. Every level of the mountain, you're going to see things differently. And each higher view encompasses all of the lower views. They're not wrong. They're just different in their level. And the higher view has a different vantage point. So the people that are at the bottom of the mountain, they need to be told, okay, you go here, here, and here, and you climb this. And maybe they go in some kind of roundabout way to navigate these cliffs and these parts of the mountain. But all of that going a little bit this way, a little bit that way, is just to get you further up the mountain. And it's not a matter of right or wrong. That was just what you needed at that time to get you through the next stage. So the whole concept of arguing about concepts and pointing the finger and trying to restrict another person to the rules that you are attached to doesn't make any sense, because you are not inside the other person's journey. So you don't know what source is guiding them through, or, you know, even if someone is going on the left-hand path, there's nothing wrong with that. As we said in the beginning, someone has to do that. For everyone that takes the right-hand path, someone has to take the left-hand path. And that is still pure love. It is still a beautiful sacrifice for consciousness to experience every kind of experience in all its aspects. And in the future, we may return the favor. So I find that it's a very important principle to comprehend, to intuit, and to see when you start observing yourself and a lot of the circumstances around you, maybe people having different having disagreements or being caught in dogma and trying to convince another person, then you can see the beauty of this one big tapestry where if you zoom out far enough, it all makes sense. And there's no need to argue. There's just a whole bunch of differences that are part of one big unity, one big story.
I mean, well, rules are made to be broken in a certain sense. And also there's the aspect of it. We grow in our level of being and our level of consciousness that there's inherently less dense matter, and there's actually less like ethically internal laws at these higher planes. So what used to matter or maybe was true relatively to one of the lower planes is literally not relative there. So what applies there either won't even make sense or might just simply be wrong and actually unethical at another level. And then it's hard to sometimes communicate that to others who are still at a lower level of understanding and then may feel, I don't know, jealous or insecure because they feel like, why do they have to follow rules and others don't? But they just don't understand that like the what's going on in at that stage of understanding is very different. But I mean, like you said, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day because people are doing what their being wants them to do. They're to a certain extent, right? There like isn't free will, which would make people happy to say that, but there's the illusion of free will. Every choice that we make certainly like shifts us slightly vibratorily to like a different timeline and stuff. But end of the day, I'm pretty sure everything is fated to get us to where we need to be. So in a sense, if you're meant to awaken and you don't want to follow your intuition and go down a road of just being not very dedicated to your work and trying to just still like be in fleeting circumstances and experiences and just trying to look for pleasures, that your karma will just get so bad until you suffer enough that you finally get back on doing the thing you do, because you should know better and you'll intuitively know better if you're not listening. It's basically our choice is more of just are we going to make this a little bit more pleasant or or a negative, what I mean? And so in that sense, like when we're here and the purpose, and we're here serving mission and purpose, and our mission is our being's expression of purpose, which purpose is the same for everyone, which is to awaken and help others awaken. It's just about, even when we go to help and do these things, it's more of a dharmic thing. We help those who want help. If they don't want help, that's fine. Even some of those that we help, if they're meant to not go all the way because their being wants them to, like we get a little bit of like knowledge and then still like go to the abyss and they leave, that's fine too. Because nothing that you could do will change that outcome, right? You could maybe do things a little bit differently and be nicer and in a sense develop more spiritual currency for yourself and more dharma and all of that. But like as long as you are being altruistic and you're embodying the light and you're embodying these virtues, it really doesn't matter necessarily as much your result, because you're going to go where you're supposed to go and they're going to go where they're supposed to go. And that's just, it's a, like, from my understanding, it seems like there's some in some way that's already not understood. Well, understood could work, but it's already determined. So, it is what it is. We just try to do our best and we play the role that we're supposed to play. And if our role is to be asleep in an ego and try to tempt others, and we'll do that as well. And if the role is to just even stay ignorant and just be a human being that doesn't realize
The
that, then
simulation
that's the
needs
thing.
that as well.
Yeah, because that's just the way it is. And other times through the contract, when you send your soul down, when a being sends a soul down, you might be in the other position. So it's not going to judge others if you're in a situation where, someone is really out of control and nasty mean, you turn the other cheek. It's like Jesus said, if somebody slaps you, you turn the other cheek, you let them slap the other one. Because at the end of the day, it's their being is making a sacrifice for you to be in the position that you are in, and they don't understand, but you do. So there's no reason to get identified and angry with things like that. And that's shown. Like, I know we said this, the symbol the third time, but like I said again, Neo only truly ascends when he turns the other cheek and he just surrenders, so that this is it. Surrenders and accepts his other half and comes into balance. They literally absorbs him and they become one. And then finally that one is able to burst out of the matrix and the
Mm.
machine.
And just to clarify, we're not saying to integrate the ego, but we're saying to be in balance in order to dissolve the ego. And that's the key difference, rather than, because he doesn't become Agent Smith, but he comes into balance, and then that allows him to
Well,
destroy
yes,
the agent.
integrating the ego would be the opposite of that. 'Cause integrating the ego is strengthening the ego. The symbolism of integrating the ego would actually be him fighting him over the course of 3 movies, because, like you said, he's being righteous, he's being the hero, he's attached to this positive aspect, and by being attached to the positive aspect, it feeds the negative aspect. And Smith just grows and grows in the multiplicity of eyes, which is another great symbolism. They literally starts copying himself, and there's more egos, which all of that is great. And he's creating more egos by still being in an ego, even though he has all this power. So he's just in a good ego, but good egos are also create egos.
So how do we have these people that come into the spiritual teachings and they're not able to unplug?
Well, it comes down to pride, especially I think in today's day and age, there's a real issue with mystical pride. We are a narcissistic society because we're so steeped in ego, and people are finding these teachings now online. They're teaching themselves. They come into the practices already thinking that they're like gods and they're so powerful, when really they're just asleep and they haven't even really probably even had any real spiritual experiences, and then they wonder why they don't. And then that builds like a jealousy and insecurity of others who do, or maybe they turn to doing like a lot of psychedelic drugs or something to have those experiences, whatever. But the point is that the missing component is the reason you're not having the experiences is because you actually are still asleep. And that's why, I mean, yes, there will be times that divinity will take them from you as we walk the path, but usually that is after an initial, like, you have an awakening. You now, as a reward for having your awakening, get some experiences that are supposed to keep you dedicated to the work. And then, yes, to test if you'll still stick with it, you will go through a long period of time where they might be taken away again. But if it's never happened, then that's probably a sign that your work's not very deep and you're not doing a good job. Um,
Now there can be different kinds of what we call spiritual experiences. So for example, someone may awaken clairvoyance but not yet clairaudience, or they may be getting comprehensions in meditation but they can't yet astral project. And I've heard of some people that were able to make great progress in the spiritual work but still never could astral project, because there's there's also a kind of conditioning in different cultures, where some cultures it's easier for them to astral project because there's no belief barrier about it. So say South American cultures might not only find it very easy to astral project, but also emphasize it because it's so easy, and those two things go in tandem. Whereas if you have another culture that it's just so far from their belief system and their constructed universe that there's so much more to be overcome just to be able to have those experiences, but they might have some other beautiful internal comprehensions and intuition and so on.
I think a simple way of saying what a spiritual experience is that some type of like something received from divinity. So it doesn't matter in what form that comes in, because like you said, different people awaken different faculties or whatever. You're receiving something of divinity. And the issue is with the mystical pride is that what happens is people intellectualize these concepts, and they believe they're receiving things from divinity because they're listening to their thoughts, and their thoughts are prideful and arrogant, and then they mistake those for spiritual experiences. I mean, that's basically what happens. They intellectualize things. They'll read something that they like that sounds better than something else, and then all of a sudden say that they have direct experience, that this works better, despite actually having no experience with anything whatsoever, except for just reading some books and talking a lot, and feeding their own ego. So
the key is humility.
yeah, no, humility is the absence of pride too, and it goes the other way too, right? Because we could also get jealous of others who have experiences or something, and then we, you know, like will lash out or attack them, and under the guise of whatever, they to us seem prideful because we're not observing the pride in ourselves, we're not observing that insecurity, but and then you demand other people to be humble who are trying to help you or something, but then like that literally is a lack of humility, because insecurity is just inverse pride, so you're really just, you know, not being humble in a different way. It doesn't, you don't have to be, you care about whatever everybody should think about you, so you're still being prideful, right? It's like, oh, you need to care about how I feel or all of this, and not make me look bad. Not that somebody's trying to make you look bad, but you think from your internal perception. So there's that as well.
Look
But
bad or feel bad. But
mhm.
I think that's the point with these studies is there was two things. So just now you mentioned people comparing experiences, which is why generally speaking, it's good to be more hermetic and keep a lot of your experiences to yourself. Kind of how in the story of Joseph the dreamer, he had all these prophetic dreams. And then when he went and told everyone, what did they do? The brothers got jealous and they sold him to slave traders. So it's not necessarily the wisest thing to do to go around telling everyone what divinity has given to you because it's specific for you. And the second part of this is the work is always our own. So it is never helpful, whether you're in spirituality or whether you're just in general human being land, to be pointing at other people's situations and commenting on it, because regardless of what we think, the only thing we can do is change ourselves. And if we are angry or criticizing or sad or having whatever kinds of loathing, all these things, those are ego. And blaming or pointing the finger is precisely what will stop us from seeing those energetic patterns, because we all have them, and it's much easier to see them in other people than ourselves. But the work is only to continually turn the light inwards and continue with that learning process.
We're gonna wrap up really quick. I just wanted to mention that, like, there's the symbology on the causal plane with the Merovingian, who speaks about causality. Um, I guess we won't go too deep into that. And then there's also there's another really good symbol of like those who start walking the path and turn back. With, I believe it's Cypher in the first movie, and he goes to the ego that he just wants to eat steak again, and that he'll betray
Oh,
everybody else
true.
just for
True.
coming back, which obviously leaves terrible karma. It's very similar to the biblical story of Lot and his wife when they leave Sodom and Gomorrah, and his wife turns around and looks back. She has turned into salt. Well, that's kind of happened to Cypher, right? He turns on them, and then he dies. So he gets his karma back there. And even in a miracle type of way too, right? Like he's about to kill all of them, and he's just like, but he's about to unplug Neo. He's going to unplug the one. That's it. How are they going to stop him? They're trapped in the Matrix, and he says it'll take a miracle. And the guy that should be dead gets up and shoots him. But that's what happens to you when you. That's the karma that you get. It's you when you know better and you turn back. When you know better, and let's say you're already walking the path, and then you start feeding the ego, or you know start to try to promote teachings that have black magic, or promote teachings that strengthen the ego, there's a punishment to that, and the karmic punishment is a lot more severe if we already stopped. Let's say we were already making progress, and then we go back to vices. Maybe we already stopped drinking and doing drugs or something, and then we go back to partying after we've already been transmuting our energy and all this stuff. And now it's like, yes, when we were ignorant, that was okay, but now we're going back into doing substances and stuff when we already stopped and have been transmuting our energy. And there's karma to that. We're not being consistent with the work after we already started. The karma views us differently when we begin to awaken and begin to engage consciously with these activities. And this is even before we enter the path of initiation. It's just the fact that our being has brought us to this. We're now taking classes, we're now learning, and we already started. Like, we're starting, even if we haven't unplugged yet, we still should know better. There's still levels to it. And obviously it's a lot worse if you've now like unplugged like the guy Cypher and he comes back, that's why he like dies, right? So it's relative, right? But relatively, as we grow, if we then decide to turn back and feed the ego, divinity's punishment usually is harsher. So like I said, with these things, if we're meant to end up going one way or the other, usually we're probably going to get there eventually anyway over the course of our incarnation. However, though, if we choose to do things that are quote unquote naughty, and we said this earlier, the karma then gets really bad on it, because what was the being going to do? The being's going to make sure that we learn our lesson. So,
But also, I think it's helpful not to think of it in terms of a punishment. It's not like,
well, no, it's another,
oh,
you need to learn the lesson.
I know it was like a kind of figuratively naughty, but just to clarify for anyone who might be not really understanding what we mean, that you don't get punished by anything external so much as you punish yourself, because the law is impersonal. It is simply the way of the cosmos, and there's always balance. So if you go right, and then the balance is going to go left. So if you begin to walk the path and you are coming into your destiny, and then you revert and you start pulling away from that, as these forces have begun moving in this direction, now there's a greater amassing of force, and there's going to be this counterpull into suffering that is going to be divvied out by the law. It has a kind of intelligence to it, but it's not personal in that it hates you and it sees you did the wrong thing and now you're bad and you're going to get X amount of punishment. But it is the suffering that you bring on yourself through the energies and magnetism that are coming from you.
Yeah, well, it's in the sense of like, right, there's everything creates through duality, right? So it's just how, like we said, for every person that has to go up this way and get this positive dharma to help them awaken, somebody has to go to the left-handed path. But also in the sense of like, if we're meant to go this way, then in our incarnation, we have some dharma already, right? Like, we're scheduled for dharma. And then when we come into, so now we're scheduled for dharma, we're like starting to access this dharma, we're getting more dharma, and then we try to revert back this way. Maybe we even take some people with us and we do these things that cause us suffering, cause others to suffer. Then the law will make us pay for that, and then there to be negative karma involved with it, and it will be enough karma eventually to make sure that we get back on track to where we have to go, right? So that's how it kind of works. And it's just something, that's why we always want to try to vibrate a little bit better. Like, it's not like really anything different is going to happen. We'll all make it to where we need to be, but we can make it more pleasant on ourselves by staying on mission, staying on path.
So this has been another unveiling type of conversation where we've gone through the 3 Matrix movies and talked about the symbology that's there. Maybe people have watched those movies and didn't know about that symbology, but I think they're common, though this lore is commonly used in spirituality, and more so makes a lot of sense in esotericism. And if we could summarize, essentially, it's that in order for us to complete the awakening process, we need to unplug from the matrix, which is seeing things dualistically, and we need to come into balance in order to truly dissolve the ego. So that brings us to the end of this conversation.
With that, I'll tell everyone, remember to vibrate at a higher frequency and maximize your dharma for the collective.
And be the light, be the change you want to see. You are listening to Aquarian Light, and we'll see you next time.